Welcome to our first RavenPack Control All Data podcast. I'm Marco Kangaga, and I head up quantitative research for North America here at RavenPack. I'm here today with Marko Trninic, who leads technology development at data science at AB InBev, the world's largest brewing company. We're going to discuss why companies need a coherent data strategy and how he and his team go about applying cutting-edge data science techniques to deliver actionable insights. Marko, welcome.
Thank you, Marco. It's great to be here with you today. Looking forward to our discussion this morning.
Same here. And perhaps it would be helpful if you gave a little bit of a background to our listeners and tell us what you do at InBev.
Okay, thank you for that. So let me start with some high-level intro about myself. So I've been in the industry of technology for the past 20 years. By trade, I'm an electrical engineer, and most of my career has been in the form of data, BI, analytics. As the buzzwords and the trends change, I've sort of shifted in relation to those trends. And certainly today, it's all about data science, analytics, and insights. So that's where I spend most of my time and energy. I've been with AB InBev for about 10 years, and certainly we are not I would say, a traditional CPG company. We're constantly investing and exploring the tech trends, and we believe it's a key differentiator for our business. It's one of the strategies to win in the market, and myself and my team play a major role in delivering upon the strategy that we have as a business. I've been in North America zone leading the technology and analytics, including data science, for the past 3 years. And to be honest, I'm excited every day more and more because the trends are changing so much. The technology is evolving constantly. It's difficult to really keep up with the pace, right? But we're investing massively in the research space. We are tapping into some of the new talent and some of the new techniques. And I always find it very interesting to speak to fellows like yourself on these very important topics.
Fantastic. I'm as excited as you are. So let's start with a really broad question. We can thread from there. You manage a really large global team in technology and data science. So in your experience, what does it take to build out a world-class data science team?
It's a great question. So when I started heading up or started with actually the establishment of the first end-to-end analytics function in North America zone about over 3 years ago, we literally started from scratch. We had a big, bold idea and a vision, but we had no idea how to get there. So honestly, like a lot of stuff, it is a formula that's made up of having the right people, the right process, the right data, and the right technology. Those 4 areas, are key to be connected in terms of really having the ability to develop an end-to-end capability as well as an end-to-end product. So first off, like with anything, we started to invest in the key skills of data engineering and data science. Without those 2, I would say, pillars, it's difficult to tap into any of the problems that you might be facing. In parallel, one of the things you will learn very quickly, if you bring in very advanced resources, the worst thing you can do is give them an old laptop and say, hey, build these models and without any stack to really support them. So we invested very quickly into the cloud technologies, right? And embracing open source and trying to be agnostic in terms of really the bets we make in terms of the tech trends. So we left it to our data scientists, data engineers to really be the ones that are defining the technology that they want to play in. And the third piece was really about the process that I mentioned. You do in companies like ours, you do need to show results very quickly. So rapid deployment is very important. It's about being really agile, and DevOps practices help a lot. The ability to push code very quickly and obviously manage it together with the GitHub capabilities helps us really to move things very quick. And in relation to some of the traditional methods like waterfall, you're able to show value quickly, and obviously you get more momentum and you get more funding, which is very important. And the last piece was data, right? Everything really revolves around data. So for us, as we were starting to face some of the problems that were of strategic and very complex nature, we found that we were short on data, as one can imagine. So we had a number of campaigns and a number of, I would say, initiatives that looked at tapping into some of the alternative data, which we would explore and hopefully find some features that could build some of the models. So in summary, Marco, I think it was a very, very much a parallel approach for having the right resources with some of the new skills. Obviously, Python is a big thing. So finding people with the skills in Python and some of the more advanced libraries, working in a rapid and agile environment where you can deploy outputs very quickly and show value. utilizing superior technology, right, that can accelerate your development, and really tapping into alternative data, because that's the ultimate fuel for all of these models. So that's been the journey for the past 3 years. Like I said, we started at one or two people, and now we are close to 100 engineer team, and we have 10 end-to-end products in the space, and we continue to be stretched. But it's, like I said at the beginning, it's very exciting times.
Great. So that's a massive team that requires quite a bit of organization to keep it humming. So it's a great segue into kind of describing your typical workflow. How do you go from first assessing the quality of data inputs to crunching the numbers and then finally delivering real insights to your end users, something actionable that they'll actually end up using, and at the same time managing this massive team to produce these insights in an agile way?
Right. So one of the things we learned very quickly, at the end of the day, you can position data science capabilities in any type of problem, but you want to go after the biggest, the most impactful and complex problem. So today we get obviously governed by the most complex strategic problems and questions that the business is facing, such as, hey, what are the consumer trends in future? How is COVID impacting us as a business? Right? Can we predict where the future innovations will take place? So everything starts with understanding and the really the most important question that the business is facing, and then obviously work from right to left. Right? That's really important, because if you're able to go after those most impactful problems, this is really where the highest value lies, and this is where you obviously get the highest return on value. So what we've done is, as part of obviously 3-year vision, we've sort of understood what are the 5 critical questions we need to answer for the business. I alluded to some of them earlier, which was all about, hey, can we predict where the consumer trends will take us? What are the next innovation products that we should be investing in? How is the macro and the macro trends going to impact our business? So once we understood those questions as the most strategic ones, we started to work backwards and really start to understand, okay, what is the size of the team or the pod we need? What are the types of skills we need in order to really have an end-to-end product? So obviously not only thinking about data engineers and data scientists, it's about having people with storytelling ability. It's about also making sure that you have cloud engineers. You also have DevOps engineers. It's all about having those multidisciplinary skills in the pod, right? They can really be centered around developing a product for the future. Once we have the right skills in the pod, it was all about, like you said, having the agile ways. We found DevOps practices help us a lot, because it allows us really to manage the code and the work in a good manner. So how does it practically work, Marco? Essentially, these questions are epics, right, that you define up front, and then obviously we start to plan the work in form of sprints, and then understand basically what are the amount of resources that we need, and what are the types of skills we need to have in a team. So in very agile and DevOps manner, we form a pod, and they work in agile ways in terms of managing the sprint and the outputs. And then sooner or later, you get to some kind of output that you start to really push back to the business in terms of insights, and you start to get some of the feedback. The trick is, not to do it, like I said, in a traditional manner where you build stuff for a year and then only after a year start to present. It's important to get constant feedback from the business stakeholders, so they can really shape the team. And through this series of iteration, and obviously using things like design thinking and all of that, you can start to tailor the product towards the really important question you're trying to answer. So I would say, in summary, one thing that really has resonated with us is really going after the most important problem, understanding its DNA, and then working backwards and having the right skills in the team, formulating a pod, embracing agile and DevOps practices, and really then being able to push rapidly sort of mini MVPs along the way, so you can get iterative feedback that can actually go back into the product, into the design team, so they can actually improve it constantly. Hopefully that gives you some sort of direction that we've been following. Does it make sense?
Absolutely. No, that sounds pretty similar to the way we do R&D and development work at Ravenpack, following the sprint and kind of delivering MVPs in as short of a timescale as possible. I'm curious, how many people typically work on a project of that sort?
Yeah, so obviously, I think you would have heard of a concept of a one pizza team, right? You try for these things not to be massive. Obviously, the organization is massive as a whole, as a factory that has all of these engineers across the different guilds. But we are trying to really embrace smaller pods that are fairly independent. They can move pretty quickly. So we try to have a pod, anything between 8 to 10 people max, right? So what we do, Marco, as well, we take a big problem and then we basically break it down into what we call microservices, because at the end of the day, these are all mini outputs. And then you basically develop a pod that's structured around every microservice. So traditionally, we're trying to manage these pods between 5 to 10 people, because it's a lot easier to manage holistically, rather than having these massive teams where the admin and the overhead of admin it comes at a bigger cost, and really slows you down in terms of the velocity that you're trying to achieve in an agile manner.
Give me an example of a data science based workflow that led you to a conclusion that was surprising and changed the way you developed your sales strategy or um, marketed a product.
Great, thank you for that question. So about 4 years ago, as I mentioned earlier on my call, we didn't have rich data that allowed us to understand how well we're doing in terms of sales across US, in terms of what is our market share looking like, and so forth. So about 4 years ago, we started to get our market share data at the zip code level. So you can imagine, traditionally we would understand our market share of a brand at very much a state or a federal level, which didn't tell you much, right? If you think about the information points that you have. And suddenly, we started to get our market share at a brand and zip code level. And there's 42,000 zip codes across US. So you can just imagine the amount of information points you suddenly had. So we said, so then the question got asked, hey, can you tell us, what type of brands do well in different types of zip codes and why? At the same time, we realized, this really also was a question that was related to some of the demographics data that we were starting to get. As you know, the census data is open source data. It's quite large, it's quite complex, somewhat not always harmonized. So we spend a lot of time bringing in census data that allow us to bring in the demographic insights across the zip codes. And also at the same time, we started to get weather data and GPS data. So we felt, we had the full ingredients needed to understand some of the insights that were driving our market share up, or that were driving our market share down. So we started with some of the, I would say, standard EDA or exploratory data analysis to understand, what are some of the features that we are finding, how they're relating to some of these new insights and the data that we're having. And very quickly, with the number of recommenders that we were building in traditional manner, we found a very surprising trends that were unfolding. Traditionally, we would think that the younger generation was all about having I would say that the more trendy, more premium products that were attracted to, so you think about the likes of Stella and so forth. But at the same time, what this type of data allowed us to learn is that the younger generation obviously had different types of occasions through which they were consuming our products. And there were specifically two types of occasions. One occasion is when you go to a restaurant or bar, and your preference of beer is certainly more of a trendy one, maybe an imported beer, more premium, and so forth. But we found at the same time, due to obviously the ability to understand people's buying patterns in relation to the demographics where they live, in relation to some of the GPS data, we found that people consumption preferences when it comes to home consumption were very different. It wasn't the same type of beer that they were probably attracted to in the bars and the restaurant. It was very different. It was more of the traditional beer. It was more of the beer that one was associated with that area. Because everybody felt, they wanted to have their preferences that was a lot more attached to really the state or the demographic and where it comes to. So certainly, if you think about St. Louis, which is really the birthplace of Budweiser, we found that all the generations, when it comes to home consumption, when it comes to weekend occasions. They were very affiliated about the Budweiser because this was really relevant to a much bigger understanding of the brand proposition that was relevant to the demographic and the geography of the beer. So through some of these insights, Marco, we found that obviously some of the decisions we were making in the business was based on surveys, you know, and you can imagine it's very sparse type of insight that you're getting. But then when we started to have very rich data in terms of market share, demographics, GPS, consumer preferences, we found many different trends, and we found that actually the preferences were very diverse, and they were very related to the occasion that a human goes through, and this allowed us to really influence a lot of our trade missions, what we call trade campaigns, to really go after the full spectrum of the beer portfolio, to tackle everybody's preferences. So we continue to do the same. We look at things like weather as well. We certainly find that beer is highly correlated with the weather patterns. We always say, for every inch of snow, you lose a percent of volume of beer as well. That's been a highly correlated model that's been proven, because ultimately people don't go out, they stay at home and so forth, right? So we continue to really explore this space. It's very interesting, and we're constantly finding insights or features, if you will, and we're feeding them into our trade strategy, because we are finding that humans are very complex, and at the end of the day, how they make choices, it's very we struggle to predict it, but we're finding interesting insights to understand the behavior that's constantly evolving. And in closing, one of the things that we are finding, because on one hand they're becoming very complex, we're finding that their preferences and their thinking is changing constantly. So obviously with COVID, with pandemic, with similar trends, we're finding that this has shifted their preferences in other areas. But one thing that's coming up very frequently, humans are becoming very health conscious, so they're looking for basically new offerings, but they also are very relevant to their health, to the nature, to exercises, and really getting more out of a brand than just a single occasion. Hopefully this gives you a good sort of, I would say, relevant example how data science was able to uncover a number of interesting insights that impacted how we think about our consumers.
That's a great insight. Is given the health conscious nature of the young consumer, would you be able to talk about Seltzer and the new trends in these kind of more novel consumption patterns that you're seeing?
I think we're all seeing the same thing unfold, right? A few years ago, you couldn't even find the salts on the shelf. Maybe there were a few ciders and so forth. Certainly now, if you go to any liquor store or anything similar grocery store, you find a lot of seltzers, and really the proposition of seltzers is expanding day by day. But whilst I'm not a marketeer, I'm a technologist. I can only speak to what we see from a data point of view. But we all know what we mean by white space, and certainly Seltzer's proposition was tackling a white space that was existing. Obviously, beer continues to be a very dominant category, but Seltzer plays in that sort of middle ground between the spirits and the wines and beers. And why is it becoming very lucrative? It's related to what me and you just mentioned. It's all about consumers that are very health conscious, that are actually wanting to get more out of a taste. They want to have actually made less carbs, but and they can also consume it at any time and any place. And the fact that seltzers are very easy going drinks with different flavors, right? Gives you a lot of variety. This is something that you can really explore constantly with your friends, and every flavor it can really be relevant to every individual in a specific way. So I would say the seltzer trend will continue to change. It will continue to evolve. I think we should be open-minded about the different flavors, the different tastes, the different packages, the packaging that's going to be coming this way. We believe beer is still going to be a very dominant category that's going to stay, and it's going to evolve over time. And something that we are very excited about is our organic offering in the beer space that's really relevant to the whole health consciousness aspect of individuals. Our Michelob Ultra Pure Gold is one of the first, if not the first, purely organic drink, and very low in calories and carbs as well. So we're gonna start to see a similar trend in the beer category as well, Marco. And this is something where obviously data science plays a role, because we build models that really predicts those white spaces where the innovation is going to take us. What the individuals are looking forward to. And as obviously the summer is approaching, and we are hoping for better times in terms of obviously the pandemic, this is going to be certainly a trend where massive innovation, especially in packaging, is going to unfold, and I'm very excited to be part of it.
Those are great insights. So traditionally, Ravenpack's clients have been mainly kind of clustered around quantitative hedge funds and market making desks at large investment banks. And kind of most of our workflow has been focused around, how do we generate alpha for clients, or how do we offer better risk management approaches using our data. And your mandate, at least most of it, is kind of focused on organic growth and is product focused. And I know that a lot of your objectives are around deciding the product mix, pricing at that micro level. And I remember you mentioning that if you cannot bring it down to zip code level in terms of alternative data, you're not going to use it. So I'm curious, give me a few examples of interesting techniques or features that you came across and started using in your workflow to kind of move forward in this mandate of growing your organic growth.
Yeah, so let me sort of give you a bit of a background in terms of what we are trying to do, because I think our industries and our work is very complementary, but somewhat different in terms of obviously the data science space. We all know the term AI, or artificial intelligence, right? And we say, at least in my organization, we say we do AI, but we don't mean artificial intelligence. We mean augmented intelligence. And why is this important? We are a massive organization. We have close to 15,000 salesmen every day that are making decisions in terms of really what beer offering they will make. So we're finding that data science can augment a lot of the decision making by the humans, right? Not to replace it, but to really complement and make it better, having better insights. You're giving them some blind spot that they were not aware of, right? So that's something that we pride ourselves in, and this is something that we hold true to ourselves, because this is something obviously that makes a difference as we obviously driving the insights that make better decision making. So in that regard, I would say I think we should touch on that. How do you improve these workflows and alphas and so forth? We're using the humans, to give us constant feedback in terms of the recommendations that we are making, so they can tell us if they agree with them, if they don't agree with them, have we missed something out? Because in the true form of an RL, this is something of a closed loop that you're always trying to try to get back and to improve your model. So that's something we try to do constantly, is give the insights to individuals that are making daily decisions, get their feedback, try to bring it back into the model, understand, are there edges of the model, for example, that are not right? How can you improve it, and so forth? And in closing, why it's important, I think you touched on it when it comes to really the specific insights. We're trying for it to be very individually specific. Nobody is really interested. If you think about 15,000 salesmen that are making decisions every day, nobody is interested to know of a macro trend. They're all interested, how is data science helping them do their job better in this specific zip code with these specific customers. So we're trying to use modeling techniques that are very specific to the human that's making these decisions, to really point out some of the blind spots that exist, right? So that's an important thing that we have, right? So we all often term it as locally optimized, and that's what we truly try to do. Meaning, everything we do needs to be very locally specific, and needs to be optimized for that individual and for that action that needs to be made. That needs to be made. So in relation to your question, it makes our job very hard because a lot of the data that you have is maybe at the state level, maybe it's even at the country level. Even if you look at the weather patterns, they're not specific enough. So the big challenge is about alternative data, and for it to be very specific to really the longitude and latitude of a zip code, so we can make it specific for that time and for that action that's being made in the market on that day. In that regard, we are constantly investing a lot of time exploring some of this data. So certainly the mobility data is becoming very popular for us, knowing how people, and again, very open source, and knowing how people are moving, where they're spending their time allows us to really, I would say, micromanage some of the recommendations that we are making to really be very specific to that area, because that's where we play. We play in a very, I would say, geolocated spot, which is somewhat different to some of the industries that are complementary to us. Hopefully that gives you a sense of some of the work in this regard.
When it comes to AI and ML, we're still a long ways from general AI, and I prefer to refer to our work as statistical inference via large data sets. And everyone's talking about deep learning, and it's a common buzzword nowadays. But realistically, it's a tool, and a tool that works very well when applied properly. So talk about some examples where you use deep learning or reinforcement learning to solve a problem, like in a specific use case.
Yeah, so I think you touched on a very important point there. These buzzwords, we hear them every day: AI, machine learning, reinforcement learning, deep learning. They're very important and complex techniques, as you mentioned, and not every problem needs to really be tackled by the most advanced technique that exists. So something we do really try to do the best we can is really understand the problem, like I said, the DNA of the problem, and understand what is the most applicable technique to really go after it. Sometimes just very good insight, that you do through clustering, which is a form of unsupervised learning, really goes a long way, because it uncovers some of the patterns, in terms of the groupings that one doesn't see. So something I really challenge the team to really start to think about, not only what is the safe technique that they are most comfortable with and hammer every problem with it, but rather explore this space end to end and understand, are there better ways, are there existing libraries out there that can really be more relevant for the problem. So that's one point I wanted to mention. I think that's something we should all really be conscious of, that as this space explodes in terms of some of the most advanced techniques, I think some of the traditional techniques still are very relevant, and it is about time to value. So we shouldn't really spend a massive amount of time if we can get to an MVP, as you mentioned, very quickly, because it's about that iterative learning, iterative process of getting insights out so that we can learn on the back of that. And that, I think, is the basis of RL. As I mentioned initially, we try to get outputs as quickly as possible, and really in the form of A/B testing, which is a very, I would say, important concept and technique to have, where one is able to really throw our outputs out into the market, get feedback, understand how is this doing compared to basically a control control environment, and then draw the insights out of it, and then using the RL techniques, try to improve upon it. So certainly another technique for us is A/B testing and exploration as an important one. Really, that's the base of some of the RL work. Second thing we're trying to invest a lot of time in is interpretability of the models. As I mentioned earlier on my on the answers that I gave, we try to augment the human decisions as much as possible, make them better, uncover some of the blind spots that they might have. But getting the trust from humans is hard. If it's just a black box, it's very difficult to just influence their decision without any sort of interpretability. So that's an important area and concept we are trying to invest a lot of time and energy, is how to make some of those complex neural network models more interpretable, because it is about selling the insights and getting the individuals to buy into them in order to action them. So I wanted to mention that. And then to close off your question, around where do we see deep learning as a method. It is certainly is in the space of more complex problems. For us, one of the most complex problems, and for similar industries like us, is forecasting the sales, forecasting the volume trends, forecasting the industry trend. So this is really it's not a linear problem by any means, because the amount of variables or latent features that exist out there in a traditional manner, you would really struggle to uncover and would struggle to really predict. So deep learning with ability to obviously layer some of these features in allows us to really understand this on a much more granular way and uncover territories that we were not aware of traditionally. Like I said, I wouldn't say that we are an advanced deep learning company yet. This is very much an exploratory space, but we see us using deep learning techniques in some of the more complex problems that we've been struggling in the past, and I look forward to this technique becoming even more available and interpretable as something I just wanted to allude to previously.
Yeah, that's fascinating, because the data science is a really creative discipline. Depending on how you approach a problem, it can have very different outcomes. So just as an example, we did a couple of interesting examples for our clients in using our data, for example, to figure out if there are any linkages within their large supplier network to, say, corporate corruption. Is there a way to gauge how your supplier network is affected based on certain instances of negative ESG type events? And another one we did was that this kind of utilizes some level of deep learning, but we never really trained a model. We used an off-the-shelf sentence embedding layer from Universal Sentence Encoder from Google. And we use that to rank sentences based on innovations so that we can provide a company innovation score based on a universe of companies. So it's kind of an alternative way of using pre-trained deep learning data to solve a very specific problem: how to rank a company based on innovation. So maybe let's talk about alt data specifically. Give me some examples of how you integrated interesting data sets into your framework to produce some insights.
I think I touched on some of the data early on, so I'm just going to revisit it and then build on top of that. Obviously, demographic data was gold to us. Understanding obviously people's age, understanding people preferences, understanding obviously the income levels and so forth, because these are all of our consumers that we work with every day. At the same time, I would say the whole aspect of mobility data has been fascinating for us, because once again we work with consumers that are moving every day in cars or walking. They are the ones that are moving from one bar to another liquor store to a gym and all of that. Again, all in the spirit of open source. This is becoming readily available. But I would say certainly the mobility data in relation to how people where people drive, where people spend their time, how they commute, what are some of those patterns that you can find. To give you an idea, if we know that people are in a specific zip code are spending majority of their time in gyms, this tells you a lot about your consumers. That tells you a lot about their life patterns. So then we think back, what are the types of offerings we have in terms of our beer portfolio, like the Michelob Ultra, which is all about really rewarding those health conscious, those active consumers, and that influences a lot of what we do. So I would say mobility has been key for us. But then at the same time, we mustn't forget that the macro trend insight that we're getting just in terms of the economy, the GDP patterns, some of the indicators in terms of the commodities, these all play a role in the macro trends that we didn't think about before. But certainly, with the pandemic as another, I would say, macro trend, this has really thrown us off the standard ways of tackling these problems, because suddenly you have a new variable that has no history. You don't even know how to treat, right? So what you do as a traditional data scientist, you try to look for similar patterns of something like this that has happened in the past, and then you try to, overfit these things, but they don't. So obviously this has been a very challenging area. So one hand, I would just like to summarize, Marco, is that there are some of those alternative data, like the mobility data, that's evolving daily, that it's becoming open source. But then there's other forms of macro data that has no history, they have no relevant patterns, but it's impacting everything you do. So how do you tackle those things, right? So what you do is you try to sort of chunk it up into smaller sizes, and then constantly look at these things on a week-to-week basis and how it impacts your models, and try to predict on the back of that. I certainly my team spent a lot of time last year trying to predict the trend of the pandemic, like many other companies, like many other researchers, and I would say most of us got it wrong, because this had no history, and nothing to you could not fit on it on any previous learnings. So this, I would say, will be a trend. There'll be always new alternative data, maybe as a macro trend that we're trying to learn from, but it has no history. So I think this is going to be a very challenging area for the data scientists. And the next one we are looking at is the vaccination patterns, and trying to predict, the famous question of path to herd immunity. So this is where we are exploring a lot of the new alternative data and trying to understand, can we, when is that sort of the ultimate milestone we're all embracing and hoping to happen as soon as possible.
So you mentioned that you internally developed a B2B data gathering engine, whereby your sales associates that visit clients throughout the country and throughout the globe gather data and help you formulate insights around brand trends. Can you talk a little bit about that app that you created, and how it helps you ask the relevant questions?
Yeah, so as a trend, obviously e-commerce, B2B, the digital platforms are evolving. It's a really lucrative space for everybody, and for our industry at the same time. If you think about where we are today, most of us are shopping online. Not many consumers are spending time in the groceries or liquor stores. They're the ones that are purchasing online. And at the same time, our customers, being the retailers, are in the same boat, right? Obviously with COVID, with the limitations of transport, and everybody's health consciousness, we are really building our digital platforms that are focused on B2B and B2C, so business to business, business to consumer and customer in this space. And this is allowing us to really have a direct connection with the customer in mind, that we traditionally didn't have, right? And if we are able to digitize the visibility and the communication, and having it a lot more real time, this is gold for our data science teams. Traditionally, these digital platforms didn't exist. So through the B2B platform, we are able to really gather all the telemetry data, all the feedback data from our customers, and really understand how they want to interact with our brand, how they want to interact with our campaigns, with our marketing. And on the back of that, like I alluded to before, we are trying to build recommenders that can really predict, different customers want to behave differently. Some want to be more arm's length, some want to be more connected, but by gathering their insights and some of the telemetry data, we're able to get a lot closer with them. And I think it's a trend that's going to continue to unfold. And I think obviously the Amazon was the one that was leading the way, but other industries are slowly moving to that space. And certainly we are not sitting back and waiting for it to happen. We are trying to also leapfrog and lead the way in the B2B space.
So to close off, what do you view as the biggest trends in data science in the next few years?
Wow. So I think it's a great question to try to sort of summarize everything we talked about today. It's something that I certainly spent a lot of time thinking about. If we take one step back, obviously, as we all move to the cloud, I think the technology and the capabilities are quite mature, and hardware compared to software is very superior. At the same time, our data engineering and data capabilities are becoming very mature, very advanced. And I do think that that's going to be a trend to carry on. When it comes to data science, I think obviously deep learning, as we mentioned, is going to be a key technique. But at the same time, I think some forms of data science will become a commodity. I think that the trend is one where low code or no code platforms are becoming readily available, so that data science modeling is a black box, right? Where you can train and spin up models with literally a few lines of code and get outputs very quickly. And that will lead to the last piece of the puzzle, which is, I think, where the trend will go, is all about interpretability and storytelling. At the same time, the model is only as good as the decision that you make. So if we have the best models, the most accurate with the best cross validation sort of KPIs, it's not really the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is to make better decisions. And without the interpretability and storytelling, specifically storytelling, I think the last mile will be very hard, because obviously of the complexity of the data we have, the complexity of the models we have. So I see a common trend moving towards storytelling, UI, visualization, insight, because I think, as we all can relate to, there's so much data, so much insights around us every day, and only so little do we look at daily, and only so little makes us change our decisions. So I think ultimately the end-to-end products that have that really rich visualization and strong storytelling will be the ones that make a difference to corporations like us.
Fantastic. Well, I'm becoming mindful of your time. This was all quite fascinating. And thank you, Marco, for joining our first All Data podcast. Offering your insights and expertise is always much appreciated. Join us next time where we look into other exciting alternative data topics.
Thank you, Marco. I look forward to our next session as well.